last week on International Women's Day, female athletes who are against trans women competing in their sports were dealt a win. Trans golfer Hailey Davidson, along with all trans women, will officially be banned from competing in the NXXT Women's League golf tournament. This is after the fact that Hailey Davidson actually won the event in January, which caused backlash for the league, especially as the tour can lead to players qualifying for the LGPA tournament. NXXT Golf CEO Stuart McKinnon revealed after deliberation that the competition would no longer allow transgender women to compete in the female league. He said, "Our revised policy is a reflection of our unwavering commitment to celebrating and protecting the achievements and opportunities of female athletes. Protected categories are a fundamental aspect of sports at all levels, and it is essential for our tour to uphold these categories for biological females, ensuring a level playing field." So how did Hailey Davidson take the news? Well, she wasn't happy, claiming the sport is still just as hard and competitive for her. She said, "You can scream at me, threaten me, throw insults at me and even ban me, but I will always get back up and keep fighting till the very end. Hate and bigotry will never win." But Caitlyn Jenner, who is a transgender woman who plays golf, celebrated the news, tweeting, "Victory! Great news on International Women's Day, and NXXT adopts female at birth requirement." Now, this comes after the fact that another golf tournament, cricket and even chess leagues banned transgender players from competing in female sports. Riley Gaines, a former competitive college swimmer, was a guest on Joe Rogan's podcast this week and spoke about competing against Leah Thomas.
Really what had thrusted me over the edge into no longer being willing to lie, ultimately, is he and I raced in the 200 freestyle. This is the day after he swam the 500 freestyle and won a national title, beat out Olympians, beating out American record holders, right? Keep in mind, these aren't scrubs. They're the most impressive and accomplished female swimmers this world has ever seen. And again, he beat them all by body lengths. 1 second might not sound like a lot of time, but in the sport of swimming, again, measured down to the 100th of a second, 1 second is significant. He beat the entire nation of women by almost 2 full seconds.
A lot to unpack there, guys, when it comes to the whole kind of topic about transgender athletes competing in female sports. But I want to start with obviously the latest with the golf tournament. I'll start with you, Reem. What did you think about this move from the tournament banning not only Hailey Davidson, but all transgender athletes competing?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely the right move, and I think we can have a conversation about the way in which transgender people can contribute to sports, and especially competitive sports, and not be horrible about it and not be mean about it. Hailey Davidson then coming out and calling this bigotry, I think is entirely absurd in the first instance. You know, Hailey beat all of her competitors in January. And I think that what this shows, I mean, this is effectively the second league to the top, the best of the best in golf. And of course, we can have a conversation about the fact that men and women are biologically different. Men are stronger than women. Men can have higher stamina than women. Men can do things that women cannot due to their biology. And I think it's really important that we have that conversation. I think it's entirely misconstrued and quite dangerous actually for people like Hailey Davidson to come out and say, well, this is just bigotry. It is not bigotry. It is looking at those facts, and actually it is entirely unfair for all of those other female competitors who have worked incredibly hard to get to where they are, only to be told that they have to compete with a biological man. So I think it's a great move. I think it's fantastic. And I actually think that people like Hailey need to sort of check themselves and really realise the damage they're doing to real women.
Well, you make a good point, Reem, because it is, I agree, nothing needs to be done with malice or bigotry in terms of announcement. You don't need to get up and make anti-trans comments, because it's not trying. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the golf tournament, but I don't think it's meant to be anti-trans. You know, everyone's entitled to do exactly what they want.
It's looking at biology. And ultimately, we can have conversations about, you know, the contribution that trans people can make and should make if they wish to into competitive sports. But the reason why we have different biological categories is because men and women are biologically different, and they behave differently in sports. Men are physically stronger. When it comes to golf, men will absolutely be able to beat biological women in many of these categories. So I think it's really important that we have that conversation. We can do that without being transphobic, without being nasty or mean or cruel. But actually, I think it's really important that we have these nuanced conversations. What I think is incredibly unhelpful is when people like Hailey Davidson come out and say this is bigotry. And it's not bigotry. It is looking at biology and following the facts.
What did you think, Ryan Mark?
Well, I agree with the CEO of NXXT in saying that it's about protecting the integrity of female sports. And I also agree with Reem that you don't have to be transphobic. And I disagree with Hailey in saying that it's peddling hatred or bigotry. It's not that at all. We can have discussions in a rational and reasonable way. It doesn't have to be sensationalized. It doesn't have to be exaggerative in the way that she's describing these conversations and discussions are taking place. And I also find that what we're having now, it's important to have these talks and it's important we speak about it, but it also seems pointless because ultimately we need to examine the facts and we need to examine the fact that Hailey is a biological man competing in female sports, so there is a biological advantage that she has against the other female competitors. Now that shouldn't go unnoticed, and that has to be addressed. And I think they are making the right decision in banning anyone who is trans in competing in this golfing tournament because you are at an advantage against the other women.
And on that note, obviously we had that quote from Caitlyn Jenner, who is a former Olympian. And an avid golf player. I mean, anyone knows that if you've ever watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Always golfing.
Always golfing.
Always golfing. And she, obviously, an outspoken and empowering trans woman who has, you know, transitioned in such a spotlight. And she is still anti-transgender players competing in women's sports. So I guess that what does that say?
Yeah, and look, and Caitlyn Jenner isn't the only person, right? There are many other trans women who have come out and said that this is completely unfair. And that's actually why I think that these conversations are really important. It's also really important that we don't alienate trans people in this conversation because many of them agree. I actually think most people agree. Most people agree that biologically, men have advantages over women, and that is why historically we've always categorised men and women differently. Now, there are other sports where their biology doesn't always matter, and so we often have them mixed. But you cannot, for example, put a man and a woman into a boxing ring together. That's just absurd. Nobody
it's
would
just
argue
common
that.
sense, isn't it? I think ultimately it just needs to come down to common sense.
Yes.
Well, would you say, on that note, would you, Ryan Mark, agree that there would need to be like a universal decision on all sports, college, high school, like out of that, the highest of the competitions, there needs to be a universal decision that...
I think ideally, I think this discussion and this really surpasses ideological differences. It really just comes down to common sense. A man is physiologically built in a different way to a woman. So when it comes to sports, that's why, as Reem was saying, throughout the hundreds of years, we've categorised sports, sporting events, women's sports, men's sports. I mean, there's a reason for that. So yes, if we can have it from schools, I think across the board, all kinds of events. I think there are some caveats, obviously, like chess.
Yes,
I don't necessarily see...
That was quite bizarre, I will say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it for sports like chess, but when it comes to swimming or running or golf, where having a biological advantage clearly would matter in terms of the results of the tournament, then we need to see change taking place. Otherwise, stuff like chess is fine.